أعوذ بالله تعالى من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين، حبيب قلوبنا وعظيم نفوسنا أبا القاسم محمد. الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، وعلى أصحابه الغر الميامين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد: وخلقناكم أزواجا. صدق الله العظيم. In Surah An-Naba, Surah 78 in the Quran, verse 8, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about creating the human beings in pairs. We will continue the part 2 of marriage in Islam in this series today. Welcome, dear brothers and sisters. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, to part 6 and the final part in the series of marriage and Islam. Here's a quick recap of what we have discussed so far. We have explored the marriages of many prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and their objectives of social reform through their marriages, and the marriages of the Holy Prophet, and the marriage of the Holy Prophet to Khadija alayha salatu wasalam, and the lessons learned from their marriage and the Sunnah of Rasulullah. In today's lecture, we will focus on the wives of Imam al-Hussein and the events of Karbala. As a disclaimer before the lecture, I want to make sure that everyone is aware of the fact that you might hear something that is contradictory to what you have heard previously, or you have come to know throughout your lifetime through the different majalis you've attended. The aim of this lecture is not sensationalism or controversy, but the objective here is to open our minds on the different opinions that exist about the Imam's wives and their children, and reach a deeper understanding of why Shias in different regions and communities might have different names for different personalities, and instead of using these differences to polarize our communities, we could use them to be uniting us and see the common goal of Imam Hussein and his mission. And many people ask the question of why do we have so many different names for the Imam's children and wives? Why do we have so many different narrations? Why are the stories so fragmented? And the answer to that is that there's a lot of historical records and works that were lost over time, especially during the time of the Mongols when they attacked the Muslim Empire. Hundreds and thousands of books were burned and destructed, and there's even a famous saying that the Mongols threw away so many books in the river Furat that the water actually turned to the color of ink. Secondly, we also know that throughout history, the Shia scholars and the writers were faced with a lot of oppression and could not write openly about the lives of the Imam and share that kind of knowledge. It was threatening to the rulers of their times. So many of these books that we have today, they are really the works of these authors who took significant risks to their own well-beings and the well-being of their family to even secretly compose and collect information that could be passed on to future generations. In Surah Al-Hujurat, in verse 13, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. صدق الله العظيم. This ayah has the message of diversity and inclusion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that we created you from male and female, and we made you into different tribes and different races and ethnicities, so you could get to know each other, and the best of you towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that has the most taqwa. So this message of diversity, inclusion, of stopping the discrimination, because even today, of course, we have it, but it was rampant in the times of pre-Islamic Arabia, that people discriminated against other tribes or people from different ethnicities and races in terms of marriage. They did not want to marry somebody who was different or who was an outsider. And we saw that the Prophet himself, when he married multiple wives, one of the things that he did was he married people from different religious backgrounds. Like we know his wife Juwayriya and Safiya were of Jewish background. His wife Maria al-Qibtiyya was actually from a Christian background. Also, besides religion, ethnicity, he was marrying free women of high nobility like his cousin Zainab bint Jahash, but also marrying women who were brought in as slaves like Maria al-Qutbiyya. So he had this message of diversity and inclusion, and we see that Imam al-Hussein, when he married his wives, he follows the same sunnah of Rasulullah and the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his wife. And it's sad today that people around the world, of course, still have discrimination, but especially the followers of Imam al-Hussein and the followers of Rasulullah to still today have discrimination when it comes to marriage. People are opposed to marriages outside their own ethnicity or race. We see there's a lot of opposition to interracial marriages. People who are from a certain area, like the Punjabis want to marry a Punjabi, the Hyderabadis want to marry a Hyderabadi, and so on. So besides the ethnicity and race, we also, especially in our Shia communities, we see something else that I want to point out to. We see a lot of the people from the Sayyid families want to marry just a Sayyid. They don't want to marry their children to non-Sayyids, which if that is your personal preference and that's your culture, that is okay. I want to reassure the listeners that that is not part of our religion or our religious beliefs. That is just either personal preference or just customs of whatever the region they live in. It has nothing to do with Islamic beliefs, because many times I hear the argument from Sayyid families who are actually very pious and religious. They would go and say that they want to keep the bloodlines to be pure, and they just want to marry another Sayyids. And very sad to tell you the news that besides Imam Hassan al-Hussein, there is no pure Sayyid. Every Imam after Imam al-Hussein that's coming to us, if you look at who their mothers were, I mean, just looking at Imam Zain al-Abidin, who's the fourth Imam following Imam al-Hussein, right? His mother is a Persian lady. So she was not a Sayyid. She was of a Zoroastrian religious background. She is not Arab. So we cannot say that we have this purity of bloodlines. We definitely have the honor or privilege of being Sayyids for those who are, but we cannot use it to discriminate other people or belittle other people's ethnicity or backgrounds. We should use it for the purpose of leading by example and maybe kind of showing that we Sayyids actually are doing good works. So the first woman that we want to mention from the wives of Imam al-Hussein is a woman known by the name of Sulafa, and she was from the tribe of Qudaa. And there is some mention of having a child with Imam al-Hussein, and his name was Ja'far. And some historians say that this child, Ja'far, was he died before the Battle of Karbala, and some say that he was actually amongst the martyrs of Karbala. However, we don't have too much information about this wife and this child. They are one of the most obscure amongst the wife and children of the Imam. The second wife I want to mention is Lady Sheher Bano, or she's also known as Shah Zenan. She's one of the wives of Imam al-Hussein, who was originally from Persia. She was the daughter of Yazdajerd III and the last Sassanid king. And she's the mother of the fourth Imam, Ali ibn al-Hussein, also known as Sajjad or Imam Zain al-Abidin. According to historians, that the Lady Sheher Bano and her sister both were taken as prisoners of war after the conquest of Iran by Muslims and were brought to Medina, and some narrations say that both sisters were purchased by the family of the Imam, and the two sisters married the two brothers, Imam Hassan and Hussein. And we have strong evidence that Lady Shahrbanu died during or right after childbirth. So just a note that I want to make is that in modern day, the general vicinity that we call Iran is very different than how it used to be back in the time of the Persian Empire. It's some books refer to it as Faris or Kisra. So if you read a book and you see Faris or Kisra, it's the same as the Persian Empire. It was much larger than what Iran is today. And, you know, the Persian Empire was one of the most ancient civilizations that we know about. Even if we don't remember all our history, we know that from movies like 300, the Greeks fought the Persians. We know Alexander had the aim of conquering Persia, and he did in his time and traveled throughout a large part of Persia. And the predominant religion of the Persians was Zoroastrianism, and what we call as Parsi in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. So one of the stories circulating around Lady Shahrbanu, which you know, some people come to believe, I've heard them in some lectures, I've even watched some documentaries on it, and I wanted to mention it, although it's more of a legend and a fairy tale. I wanted to mention it just so we kind of know that there is really no historical evidence to support it, yet the story is out there. So the story goes is that Lady Shahrbanu actually did not die during childbirth. She was alive, and she accompanied Imam al-Hussein on her trip to Karbala. And on the day of Ashura, when after the aftermath, when the Imam was killed and the army of Yazid started the looting, Lady Shahrbanu actually escaped from Karbala, and she rode and rode until she reached this area in Iran known as Ray. And on the slope of one of the mountains, her enemies threatened to get a hold of her, and with the last of her strength, she asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to deliver her from these evil people, and the mountain miraculously opened and gave refuge to this princess. However, a tail of her dress remained wedged in between the rocks, and when it closed behind her, the pursuers actually found the cloth in the rock. So they realized of the miracle and acknowledged that Shahrbanu was a holy lady or a saint. And in fact, in Iran, there is a shrine that people go to visit to. But like I said, I wanted to mention the story so you can be aware of it. But based on the historical evidence that we have, this is a very unlikely story to be true. But Allahu A'lam of what really happened. The other lady I want to mention today is known as Ishaq bin Talha. She's one of the wives of Imam al-Hussein, and she was the daughter of Talha bin Ubaidullah, the famous companion of the Prophet and Imam Ali's friend, and he was the cousin of Abu Bakr, the first Khalifa. After Imam Ali became the fourth Khalifa, Talha and Zubayr assumed that they would be given lofty positions in governance due to their friendship with Imam Ali, but he refused and said that he would assign the mantle of leadership or the position of a governor to different areas under the Islamic Empire based on merit and not based on his friendship with these people. And he did not give them the positions that they seeked out to do. So Talha and Zubair both were angry and spiteful towards Imam Ali, and then Talha went and fought Imam Ali in the Battle of Jamal. So this lady Ishaq was first married to Imam al-Hassan, and some narrations tell us that Imam al-Hassan gave the wasiyah to his brother Imam al-Hussein on his deathbed to marry this lady and take care of her. There is a strong evidence that this lady was actually in Karbala and was present on the day of Ashura. She had children with both Imam al-Hassan and at least one daughter with Imam al-Hussein. And we find narrations again calling the daughter of Imam al-Hussein as Fatima. Some say the girl that was left in Medina as Fatima al-Sughra or Fatima al-Alila was her daughter. And some say that the daughter of Imam al-Hussein buried in Baalbek, Lebanon, known as Khawla, and there's a shrine there for her, was the daughter of Ishaq and Imam al-Hussein. Also, some narrations mention that one of the wives of Imam al-Hussein was pregnant in Karbala and she was expecting, and after the wives and daughters of Imam al-Hussein and Ahl al-Bayt were captured and taken into captivity, they had to endure the journey from Karbala to Kufa first, and then from Kufa to Sham. And during that journey from Kufa to Sham, one of the ladies who was expecting had a miscarriage, and this could have been this lady, Ishaq bin Talha. Another lady who is a very famous wife of Imam al-Hussein is Layla bint Abi Murrah. So Layla is the daughter of Abu Murrah bin Urwa bin Mas'ud al-Thaqafi from the famous tribe of Banu Thaqif near Ta'if. For all of you who've been to Mecca for Hajj or Umrah, you must have visited the city of Ta'if, where you have to prep for Ihram right before you enter Mecca. And history has given us some famous characters or personalities from Banu Thaqif. We know the likes of Yusuf bin Hajjaj. He was a Thaqafi because his name is Yusuf bin Hajjaj al-Thaqafi. And we also know that Amir al-Mukhtar, he is also a Thaqafi because he is Mukhtar al-Thaqafi. However, Lady Layla's grandfather, Urwa, was even more famous in all of Arabia than these two. And although he resisted the da'wah of Islam initially, after time and his interaction with Rasulullah, especially looking at his akhlaq, his manners, his attitude, and how he was loving and forgiving and always treated people with respect, it motivated him to convert to Islam. So Urwa bin Mas'ud and his son, they both converted to Islam and became one of the famous Muslim contributors and allies of Rasulullah. On her mother's side, Layla, though, is from the Umayyad family, or she's an Umayyi, because Layla's mother was Maymuna, the daughter of Abu Sufyan. So Layla had the two families together. From one side, from the paternal side, she was a Thaqafi. From the maternal side, she's an Umayyi. And a point that I want to highlight is that her name was Layla, not Layla. In Arabic literally means mother. As if you put the word before a noun, like a name, it becomes mother of. So we started seeing the tradition of Layla's name being deviated to Layla much later in the books of history, especially after what we know as the Rawda Khans in Persia and Iran, who would go from place to place narrating the tales of Karbala. They started referring to her as Layla, and I believe that they were doing it out of respect because they just don't want to call her Layla. But the deviation infiltrated over time in Nohas, in poetry, and then it turned into books, and the name changed. However, her name is Layla. So we know Layla was the mother of Ali al-Akbar, the eldest son of Imam al-Hussein, and she could have also had a daughter with Imam al-Hussein. Some say again Fatima al-Sughra or Fatima al-Alila in Medina was her daughter, and some say Fatima al-Kubra, who was in Karbala, also known as Sakina, was her daughter, the teenage girl. However, there's a difference of opinion if she was actually Layla herself was in Karbala or not. Some say that yes, she was, and some say that she was not. And the people who say that there is a mix-up and she wasn't, but we still see history mentioning a Layla being at Karbala, they say this was a different Layla. She was Layla bint Mas'ud, the mother of one of the martyrs in Karbala. But Allahu A'lam if Layla was there or not, but these are the stories that we have through our history. The last wife of Imam al-Hussein that I want to mention is Rabab bint Imr al-Qais. She was the daughter of Imr al-Qais bin Adi, an Arab Christian from Syria who converted to Islam in the times of Umar bin Khattab. Again, I want to stress that her name is Rabab, not Rubab or Rubaba or Rabab, because Rubab or Rubaba is a musical instrument in Arabic. You see a lot of traditional folk music, that's Arabic, old music. They use a Rubaba or a Rubab to play that. So just out of respect for this lady, we should try to make the effort of pronouncing her name correctly. So we know through historical records that she has at least 2 children with Imam al-Hussein. The 6-month-old infant in Karbala, who is known as Ali al-Asghar in the Indo-Pak community, or as Abdullah al-Radi' in the Arab community. There is a strong evidence that the name was of this child, infant child, was Abdullah, because the Imam already had 2 sons, Ali al-Akbar, and Akbar meaning senior or the eldest or the elder in Arabic. And then he already had another son by the name of Ali, who is Imam Zain al-Abidin, and there is some narrations that they say he was, Imam Zain al-Abidin was actually Ali al-Asghar because he was the younger brother. And the reason there's strong evidence that the child's name was Abdullah is also that the kunya that Imam al-Hussein took was Aba Abdullah, right? That's why we refer to him as Aba Abdullah in our ziyarah. We say, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. In our famous saying, we say, La yawmanka yawmanka ya Aba Abdullah. We refer to Imam al-Hussein as Aba Abdullah because his youngest son is Abdullah. The second child we know that Lady Rabab and Imam al-Hussein had together was a young girl around 4 to 6 years of age. And again, in the Indo-Pak region, she's known as Sakina or Sukaina, and in the Arab world, she's known as Ruqayya. And there is strong evidence that the girl's name was actually Ruqayya, and she was in Karbala, and she died in Sham, and she's buried there, and that's why we have the great shrine where we can all go and visit. And it's if you look at the names there, it's actually Ruqayya and not Sakina. However, we believe that since all of the daughters were called Fatima, their nicknames or the names that we use them to differentiate was like one was Sakina or Sukaina, one was Ruqayya or Fatima al-Kubra, Fatima al-Sura. So there was another daughter who was named Sakina, and she was older. She was a teenager, and she actually survived the Battle of Karbala, and she actually returned back to Medina, and there's a reference of her interacting with Imam Zayn al-Abidin after the Imam returned and lived in Medina, and even when he was going to Hajj, how his sister Sakina, arranged for money to be given to the poor. So we have some narrations actually mentioning a Sakina living in Medina, who's the sister of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, and there's a good evidence that she could be the same Sakina who was in Karbala, but she was much older. But Allahu A'lam of the names and the personalities and the children and the wives of Imam al-Hussein that were at Karbala or were not at Karbala or survived the aftermath of Karbala or did not. The trials and tribulations for the women in the caravan of Abu Abdullah didn't begin at Ashura. They started long ago when the Imam fled Medina in the cloak of darkness to Mecca, and then from Mecca to Karbala. On Ashura, all these women like Sayyida Zainab, Layla, Rabab, Ishaq, Lubaba, Kulthum, and Daylam, and the mother of Wahab al-Kalbi, sacrificed their families fi sabilillah and watched the army of Yazid butcher their sons, brothers, husbands, fathers. One can only dare to imagine the psychological trauma they must have endured. But once the dust settled and the Imam al-Hussein was martyred, the suffering of the men of the Husseini camp ended. But for the women, the dark night continued. Maqtal al-Hussein. When all the males from the side of Imam al-Hussein were martyred, the Imam went towards the battlefield and called out, Ya Habib ibn Malahir, Ya Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, Ya Muslim ibn Awsaja, O valiant warriors, O brave fighters. Why is it that I call upon you, but you don't answer? Why is it that I invite you, but you don't answer me? Get up from your sleep and take a look. These are the daughters of Rasulullah, with nobody to protect them. So rise from your position and come to defend them from these evil oppressors, those in front of us. ए अज़ादारान हुसैन, आप ये मंजर तसव्वुर कीजिए। आशूरा का दिन है और असर का वक्त है। करबला के मैदान में जलती धूप में और तपती हुई रेत पर मेरे ज़ईफ़ इमाम, 3 दिन के भूखे और प्यासे इमाम, दिन भर से लाशें उठा उठा कर थक चुके हैं। इनकी कमर झुक गई है और लिबास बदन भी खून से तर है। कभी हुर का लाशा, कभी ओनो मोहम्मद की लाशें, कभी कासिम के लाशे के टुकड़े उठाए हैं। कभी अकबर का लाशा तो कभी असगर का नन्हा लाशा, पर एक लाशा है जो फुरात के किनारे तन्हा ही पड़ा है। अब इमाम के सब साथी शहीद हो चुके हैं। इमाम जंग के मैदान की तरफ रुख करके फरियाद करते हैं, ए हबीब इब्न मज़ाहिर, ए ज़ुहैर इब्न अलक़ैन, ए मुस्लिम इब्न औसजा, ए मेरे पुरजोश सिपाही, मेरे सिपा सालार, तुम अपने इमाम की आवाज पर जवाब क्यों नहीं देते? उठो अपनी इस नींद से और देखो तो सही करबला के मैदान का ये मंजर। तुम्हारे रसूल की बेटियां यहाँ हैं, पर इनकी हिफाजत करने वाला कहाँ है? इमाम ख़याम हुसैनी की तरफ रुख करते हैं, जहाँ से सैलानियों की गिरिया और बुका की आवाजें गूंज रही हैं। वाह अलिया, वाह कासिमा, वाह अकबरा। बीबियां जानती हैं कि एक एक करके सब शहीद हो चुके हैं। पहले इमाम के साथी, फिर तमाम बनी हाशिम के नौजवान, गाजी अब्बास, शुजा बहादुर अब्बास, इमाम के लश्कर का अलमदार, जिसके होते हुए यजीदी फौज की मजाल ही न थी कि खैमों की तरफ आंख भी उठाकर देख सके। अब उस गयूर बहादुर भाई का भी सहारा न रहा। इमाम खैमे में दाखिल होते हैं। बीबियां इमाम के गिर्द हल्का बना लेती हैं। आंसू जारी हैं। बच्चों की अलतश अलतश की सदा गूंज रही है। गिरिया और बुका जारी है। इमाम बीबियों से आखिरी खिताब करते हैं, दिलासा देते हैं, आगे सफर बहुत सख्त है, मेरे बाद हिम्मत रखना, मेरे माबूद की यही मर्जी है। बीबियों की आवाजें सुनकर सैयद सज्जाद, मेरे बीमार इमाम भी उठ जाते हैं और असा और तलवार तलब करते हैं। जब बीबियां ने पूछा कि मौला ये दो चीजें क्यों, तो सैयद सज्जाद ने फरमाया, असा ताकि मैं सहारा लेकर खड़ा हो सकूं, और तलवार ताकि मैं जाके अपने बाबा की दिफा कर सकूं जब वो निदा दें, हल मिन नासिरिन यंसुरुना। इमाम एक एक करके सब बीबियों को बुलाते हैं, ए रुकैया, ए सकीना, ए रबाब, ए बहन उम कुलसूम और ज़ैनब। और जब सब बीबियां जमा हो जाती हैं, उनको सईद सज्जाद के हवाले करके खैमे से रवाना होने की कोशिश करते हैं। इमाम के खैमे से कदम बाहर निकलने से पहले ही एक आवाज आती है, महलन महलन इब्न ज़हरा। और इमाम रुक कर बीबी ज़ैनब से पूछते हैं, ए बहन, हमारी अम्मा ज़हरा ने जाने से पहले तुम्हें अपने पास बुलाकर कुछ बताया था। तुमने करबला में बताने का वादा किया था। वो क्या बात थी? बीवी ज़ैनब ने फरमाया, या अबा अब्दुल्ला, भाई मुझे अपनी गर्दन और सीना दिखाइए। फिर इजाजत लेकर इमाम की गर्दन और सीने के बोसे लेती हैं, फिर इमाम के माथे के बोसे लेती हैं, फिर कहती हैं, यही अम्मा की वसीयत थी भैया। जैसे कि बीबी को पता था कि एक दिन आएगा जब उनका हुसैन करबला के मैदान में अकेला रह जाएगा और उस पर पत्थर बरसाए जाएंगे। मेरे हुसैन का माथा जख्मी हो जाएगा और मेरे हुसैन के सीने पे तीर और नेजों से वार किया जाएगा। हुसैन की गर्दन पर शिम्र लईन कुंद खंजर चलाएगा जब तक कि वो जिस्म से सर जुदा हो जाएगा, और फिर ये जिस्म घोड़ों की टापों से पामाल किया जाएगा। इन्ना लिल्लाहि व इन्ना इलैहि राजिऊन। इन्ना लिल्लाहि व इन्ना इलैहि राजिऊन। أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا بالحسين عليه السلام، وجعلنا وإياكم من الطالبين بثأره مع وليه الإمام المهدي من آل محمد عليهم السلام. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, Ya Ghafoor, Ya Kareem. O Lord, I, your humble servant, come to thee with my head bowed down, with my arms stretched out, with eyes full of tear and heart full of sorrow, but a soul full of hope. I beseech you, O glorious one, to shower your mercy on all of your creation, especially the mu'mineen and mu'minat listening to this lecture. I, I invoke the intercession of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad during this pandemic to protect us and our loved one from COVID-19 and to heal those who are infected and ease their suffering. O Allah, I beseech you to grace us with resilience and patience to not only survive but thrive in the face of our challenges and emerge stronger emotionally, physically, psychologically, and spiritually. Ameen Ya Rabbil Alameen. Dear brothers and sisters, thank you for taking the time to watch these videos. If you found the content to be engaging and informative, please don't forget to like the videos. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.